My name is Andrew Kling. I'm with the University of Maryland Extension at the Woodland Stewardship Education Program at the Western Maryland Research and Education Center. Today's webinar is Increasing Adoption of Residential Wood Energy, Past, Present, and Future. My colleague Jonathan Cates is going to talk about trends in home and commercial use of wood energy, different types of heating devices available, and regulations to improve their efficiency and atmospheric environmental conditions. And he's also going to share a number of best practices for buying, storing, and seasoning wood for heating. But before we get going, we have a few details to go over first. If you've never been with our webinar series before, welcome. Thank you for joining us. If you've been with us before, we've got a few reminders before we get started. If you're interested in our webinar series, the easiest way to keep in touch with us to find out what we're going to be doing is to join our listserv. Send an email to listserv@listserv.umd.edu, or you can contact me directly through my email, which is akling1, that's A-K-L-I-N-G, and the number 1, at umd.edu. But we do record all of these webinars. If you discover that we're running over a little bit, you have to get away to join something else, or if you want to share this webinar with other people, we do record all these and share them on our YouTube video. Now, that's not the only way you can keep in touch with us. We also have a website that has all sorts of interesting information about woodland stewardship, information on converting lawn to woodland, on invasive species, how to manage your property for tax purposes, and so on. There's also information about the 2 online courses we offer, the General Forestry course and the Woods in Your Backyard online course. And we also have a Facebook page at facebook.com/UMDFSE. I try to share things that are a little more regional and global in scope there, rather than just Maryland and the Mid-Atlantic. So we invite you to visit both of those pages and learn a little bit more about the Woodland Stewardship Education Program. Now, the easiest way to get a hold of me or get our attention during the webinar is to use the chat room. Hopefully at the end we'll have some time for questions and answers. If we don't get to you during the program, go ahead and email us and we'll respond to you directly. Once again, my email is akling1@umd.edu. Now, before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my video here for a second. And what we're going to do is find out a little bit about who's joining us today. We've got a few poll questions to ask you. On the right-hand side of your screen, you should see some polling questions. And I'll give you a minute or two, a couple of minutes to go ahead and give us some information so we can find out who's joining us today. And we appreciate that. Okay, I thank you very much for sharing that information with us. I'll go ahead and close the poll and bring up Jonathan's picture here. As I said, today he's going to be talking about increasing adoption of residential wood energy, past, present, and future. Now, let me make sure that Jonathan's here. Okay, Jonathan, are you available now?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. All right. It's great to be here. I'm going to share my screen. Again, we apologize for the delay. We have a new system here. See how this works. All right. Can you see me now?
Yep, you got it.
Okay. Okay, welcome. I again apologize for the delay here. We have a new using WebEx now, and it's a very different system and had challenges. So, folks, I'm not sure. I can't see how many people are online here, but we talk a little bit about residential heating with wood, and just to kind of give a brief overview of some of the things we're going to talk about today. I've been dealing with a lot of residential wood heat issues and working with the technology and everything else, and a lot of this programming has come out of the Maryland Wood Energy Coalition, which is a group of businesses and agencies and others interested in increasing the adoption of wood energy technologies to Maryland, focusing on small and medium-sized commercial institutional applications, but in this case, we're really focusing on residential thermal applications, wood stoves, pellet stoves, and things like that. So just in terms of putting energy in kind of the context of what it is, a lot of times we think of energy, people tend to think of solar and wind and hydro, which is basically electricity, okay? Geothermal and woody biomass are really thermal sources of energy. In other words, they produce heat. And that's up until recently, many times, biomass, in terms of, heating with wood or pellets, it's barely mentioned in some states under renewables. And it's taken a big challenge to help people understand and change the perception of heating with wood as a dirty fuel by policymakers and citizens. And so it's been a major challenge because people don't realize how clean this technology can be. Just to give you an idea of how wood stands up, it is a market leader in reducing fossil fuel use in the United States. Many people have wood stoves and pellet stoves. And these are some older numbers from 2011, but when you look at the amount of BTUs, in other words, heat units produced from wood compared to solar and geothermal, wood far stretches out that, realizing now that there have been a lot more solar units installed, but still, wood is a major source of heat, okay? And if you're into fossil fuel reduction, also at 2000, basically a wooden pellet stove gives a similar fossil fuel reduction in terms of a $20,000 solar PV unit on the house. And again, some of these prices are different right now, but the point is, if you're looking at displacing carbon from fossil fuels, wood stoves are a great candidate for doing that because of the amount of energy that's in that wood and how it burns. What is woody biomass? Well, certainly we're talking about native forests, which provide firewood. And then we also have sawmill residues, from sawdust and things like that, which actually is a really prime source of material for producing wood pellets, if you can get it. And then there's the whole urban waste issue of tree removals. Every time the wind blows and there's a storm, trees are coming down to the ground, and we have firewood. And there's a lot of it, and a lot of it's used to make mulch, but a lot of it could also be used as wood chips for, especially for commercial operations. And a lot of tree companies actually are major firewood producers from the trees they take down. So why is there increasing interest in wood? Well, it's a cultural thing. Many people just enjoy the ambiance and the heat, sitting in front of a wood stove or even a pellet stove. And then there's the whole, saving money on heating issue. Interesting statistic is that 60% of people who heat with wood cut their own, at least some of it. So, and we know in many areas, heating with wood is basically, when you look at it from a cost per million BTU basis, is very inexpensive compared to other fuels. And of course, many people have access to free wood. They say, well, I have free wood, I can heat with wood, but of course, nothing's free. You have to have a truck, firewood, you have to handle that wood 2, 3, 4 times. And then there's the whole heat security issue. And many people live in rural areas or where there's power outages. You look at having a wood stove as a way to provide heat when the power goes out. This is less so for pellet stoves, which we do require electricity, but many of the manufacturers are starting to sell, backup units and things like that. Many people have an interest in wood because it augments a heat pump. Many people just don't like heating their house with a heat pump in the summer or in the wintertime because, it just doesn't provide that real sense of, thermal heat or radiant heat you get from a wood stove. And of course, being environmental responsible. If you want to, using wood helps the management of forests and other things like that. Also, it can be, again, cut down the use of fossil fuels. So what are the types of residential wood stoves? Most people have freestanding wood stoves or fireplace inserts. Your wood stoves, of course, use firewood, and these are the most difficult ones to control emissions because there's a lot of operator area that can be involved. Pellet stoves, basically, they're used as standardized fuel. I'll talk about them a little bit later. And they have very low emissions. So environmentally, they're very good for reducing emissions. There's also pellet wooden pellet furnaces. Now, I mean by these are furnaces that are inside the house, kind of taking the place of your traditional heating system in the basement. These are more popular up in the Northeast, colder climates, very popular in Europe, not so much here. Then we have outdoor wood boilers, and actually these have very high emissions, and they have traditionally set a very bad image for wood burning. This is something we'll talk about in a minute. This has been a real issue. So how many homes are heated primarily by wooden pellets? We have a lot of census data from the last census that gives us some of those numbers. And you can see these percentages are relatively low in most states, a couple of percent. But when you get up into the more rural states or areas where there's a lot of colder climates, you see, up in North Pacific Northwest, 7.1 for Oregon, 9.2 for Montana. Number of homes heated primarily by wooden pellets. Up in the Northeast, up in Maine, it's 13.7. I know those numbers are hard to read, but this really doesn't tell the whole story, because there has been a real rapid rise in the use of residential wood heat per capita in the United States. Overall, 2.1% of families use wood or pellets as primary heat. But the big thing here is that many people use it as a source of secondary heat. On the weekends or in the evenings, things like that, when they don't want to use their other fuel sources. And you can see some of the states that have had dramatic increases up to from 2000 to 2010. Of course, we'll get another census soon. Anywhere from 60 to 80% in some states. Quite a high increase. But this really doesn't tell the story, because what happens when you remove these urban centers? When you look at these percentages, I think you'll see they dramatically increase, because many people in more rural areas tend to burn wood. This is some numbers that the highest per capita primarily wood burning households per state. These are very rural counties, obviously. You're getting up into the 30-40 percentile of homes that heat with wood. So anyway, just something to remember. I think wood use is a lot higher percentage than is portrayed by per capita numbers. When you take out those urban areas, it's a much larger number. One of the barriers to using wood is wood smoke, and this is because of inefficient stoves. But these are major problems in mountain and valley areas throughout the United States. That many of these communities have actually outlawed wood stoves, trying to transition people to pellet stoves and providing incentives to do that. In some cases, they're being successful, but in many cases, it's becoming very regulatory that if you're more populated areas where you have these air quality problems, regular wood stoves that are not used properly, or older wood stoves, as I'll mention here in a minute, are a real problem. So, let's talk a little bit about the history of wood stoves a little bit. Prior to 1988, a wood stove was basically a box with a pipe on it. Very inefficient, very high emissions. And in 1988, the EPA came in and established performance standards for wood stoves that said that all wood stoves had to produce less than 7.5 grams of particulates per hour. So these are particulates, it can be measured. Particulates are a synonym for, basically for a surrogate, for other types of air quality pollutants. So under 7.5 grams per hour was a big change from what these older stoves were producing. And many companies ceased business as a result of this, but many of these stoves are still around. Timberline, Fisher, any stove where you see like big metal doors on the front with the air control things on there, and you look in them, and there's basically just a box and a pipe. The thing with lower emissions is that they also produce higher efficiency. So if you can more efficiently burn the wood that's in there, you get high efficiency, and this actually amounts to savings for you as the consumer, because you're consuming less wood to get the same amount of heat. And just remember this, smoke is basically unburned fuel. So unburned fuel has high emissions. So the goal here is to do that. And the way most of these stoves worked, here's a picture of a pre-EPA stove that you see here, and on the left. And again, not really very closed, and a lot of air, very inefficient, compared to the past 1988 EPA stove. And what this basically added was you have a primary combustion chamber, but also that air is, instead of going out the pipe initially, is forced to recirculate around to some secondary combustion through those pipes at the top. They get superheated by the flames and basically continue to burn up the particulates. So you get much lower emissions. And air comes in through the bottom. So very different than a lot of the older stoves that had the big knobs on the front and things like that. So this is the basic design that provides the efficiency of newer stoves with this secondary combustion. Back after 1988, some of these older stoves basically tried to meet these lower emission requirements by using catalytic converters, which work basically the same as a car. You know, you have the gases that go in, and it comes out as water vapor and carbon dioxide. And they worked. The problem is that many of these things got clogged over time, and people tended not to want to replace them because they're expensive. And then they end up just taking them out. And so you have the same issue you had before. So most people don't like stoves with catalytic converters because of the cost issue and maintenance. So look at the effect of wood stove efficiency on fuel costs. This is just an example. Let's say you have a cord of wood that you purchased. And we usually express this on the heating capability or potential on the number or the cost per million BTUs. So let's say we purchase a cord of wood, oak wood, for $150. A fireplace, which is the most inefficient heat burning device, is maybe 10% efficient. The amount of heat you get from that fireplace is going to be about $59 per million BTUs. Extremely high cost to try and heat your home. A non-EPA wood stove prior to 1988 may be 40% efficient, 14.7 dollars per million BTUs. And then EPA wood stoves. And again, these are this is cents. I'm sorry, not dollars, but EPA 70% efficient, 8.5 cents per million BTUs. Actually, I apologize. It is dollars. The point here is that whether you buy wood or cut it yourself, there are large efficiency savings and health savings from reducing smoke. So again, efficiency is a big issue, and that's what the newer stoves, basically shine. Higher efficiency, more complete combustion, more dollars, more BTUs per dollar spent on the fuel. So this is really the crux of the problem we have right now, is that most of the wood heating equipment that's out there is outdated and polluting. It's older wood stoves that are pre on the far right there is pre-1988. And I'm not sure that you can actually see my cursor here. So with this new system, but on the far right, you see that over 50% of the stoves that are out there are these older equipment pre-1988, and and you can see the emissions per hour, is basically extremely high. So EPA certified wood stoves basically are about maybe 30%, a little more than a third of the stoves. And if you see the green square inside that, that's where your 7.5% emissions are. Okay, the emissions are on the right side of the scale, and percent of the number of stoves is on the left, percent used. So when you get to pellet stoves, less than 10%, very efficient, very low emissions, and we'll talk about some of the others as well as very, very efficient. Traditional wood boilers are basically extremely high emissions, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So pellet stoves have come a long way. They basically have very low emissions because they have a standard fuel, and one of the reasons they're very popular is because they don't require a big chimney. If you have a wood stove, you have to many times get a chimney that's capable of handling temperatures in the thousands of degrees. Not so with a pellet stove. It just requires a little 3-4 inch wood bent pipe that goes out through the ceiling or out through an exterior wall. They may require some more repair. They are run by electricity, which is definitely a downside if you're concerned about the power going out. And they use 40-pound bags of pellets. And how a pellet stove works is that it's highly automated. You basically have a hopper, which is the number 1 there where you see the pellets are. You fill that up. You have an auger, which is number 3 there, kind of augers these pellets, which goes into a combustion chamber, which is number 7 there, and controls the combustion. And you have a blower, which is number 2. It basically moves the heat out into the room, and you have ash that drops out. So some of the cheaper stoves, the problems with pellet stoves are clogging. So it's always good to pay for a good quality. You look at the reviews on pellet stoves. But this is how they basically work. Very little amount of ash compared to burning with wood. Wood pellets are a big issue. You want to make sure you buy quality wood pellets. Most residential wood stoves require pellets that are less than 0.5% ash. And typically you buy them by the pallet. Pallet is 1 ton of pellets, which comes in 40-pound bags, so it's 50 40-pound bags. And you get them delivered. In some states you have bulk delivery. It's very difficult to get around here, and that's kind of a different issue. So pellet stoves and furnaces, on the other hand, those are in your basement. Again, up in the Northeast and up in many parts of Europe, they have places where they actually have a bunker, a hopper in the basement that stores wood pellets. As you can see, they can be delivered into a hopper. Then they're metered into the system. It's all automatic. These are very efficient, but really they are costly, and in many cases, many parts of Maryland, it's hard to find many of these because we don't have long enough winters. But up in the Northeast, there's a number of these systems. So what happened in 2015? Like I said, in 1988, EPA first stepped in with performance standards 7.5 grams of particulates of emissions per hour. In 2015, they provided new source performance standards for residential wood heaters that said that by 2015, all wood stoves have to have less than 4.5 grams of hours of particulates emission per hour. And actually, a lot of stoves had already been meeting this by this time, so not as big an issue. The challenge is that it says by 2020, the emissions limits of 2 grams per hour using crib wood, or 2.5 grams per hour with cordwood. And this is the way they're tested. So actually, many stoves are actually tested using almost like a crib 2x4s. And knowledgeable people in the industry are saying that you need to use more cordwood, which is representative of what's used, and that allows a slightly higher emissions rate. The point is that this is it's a real challenge for wood stoves to meet this, not for pellet stoves, but for wood stoves, this is a real challenge. They also required that you had to provide, by 2015, all wood stoves had to be tested for efficiencies. So what do you see when you go out and buy wood stoves? In many cases, you see these published efficiencies, and none of them are really backed up by great data. So now there's a standardized system for measuring efficiencies, and you don't have to really look at manufacturers' claims. The EPA has a website where all these efficiencies are published. So the more efficient, the less fuel that's burned, and lower emissions. So that's what we're striving for. And a number of these stoves have already been tested. Of course, the emissions efficiencies of many of your stoves are going to vary just depending on the models. But the question is, how will technology change to meet the 2020 emission standards? Some manufacturers are going back to catalytic stoves to meet that 2 grams per hour, which would not be difficult with catalytic converters or stoves. But again, you have those whole issues of they have to be maintained properly. And then some companies are looking at hybrid stoves, some catalytic stove component, as well as like traditional secondary combustion and burner, making that. And then the third part that's really coming up is this whole idea of a smart stove. Having a stove where you can use seasoned wood, you put it in, you have pellets, and it basically takes over everything after that. And that's some development in that area. So these new EPA regulations that are requiring, efficiencies be tested, these lower emissions limits, they're going to result, the efficiencies, that disclosure of efficiencies is going to result higher efficiencies It's going to help consumers to pay more money. And it's going to end many of these misleading false advertising claims that are similar out there. It requires all stoves be certified. And it ends the sales of worst outdoor boilers, because this is a real issue. For many of the outdoor boilers can meet these 2015 emissions requirements, but it's going to be very difficult for the in 2020 to meet the reduced emissions requirements, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Of course, with any type of change like this, it's spurring innovation amongst the companies that produce wood and pellet stoves, and that's usually a good thing. So what about wood boilers? How does that fit in here? How do they compare as a biomass appliance in terms of emissions? And this is the problem, and this is, I think, outdoor boilers, especially older ones, have really given burning wood a bad name. Because if you look on the far right, outdoor wood boilers, 161 grams of particulates per hour, which is actually even higher than a fireplace, which is extremely high, 85. So you see your uncertified wood stoves prior to 1988, on average, were probably about 30 grams of particulates per hour. But the new EPA outdoor wood boilers that were certified, they're called Stage 1 or Phase 2 stove, are down to 18 grams of particulates per hour. So anyway, then we go down into the interior wood stoves we talked about earlier, but the 7.5 grams per hour. So the point is that outdoor wood boilers are very polluting, and these are unlawful in the state of Maryland to sell, and in many states you have to buy the EPA outdoor wood boilers, which are at that 18 grams per hour on average. So let's look at that a little bit more. Okay, you see I actually had them highlighted here. So wood boilers are known as outdoor hydronic heaters. And in 2015, the EPA regulations said they have to meet these newer, higher standards. The stove that was sold was formerly called a Phase 2, but it's now an EPA Phase 1. This is what's lawful to sell in the state of Maryland. It requires the use of seasoned wood. These newer stoves, I'll tell you, are much more difficult to use. You just can't throw anything in them. They'll go out. So in 2020, the Step 2 comes in. This is going to be hard for the industry to meet. And now the old wood boilers are still allowed, but all the fuels must burn clean burning fuels. Can't just throw junk in there. And you can see on the right, this is a lot how these boilers are used. They're inside of a shed outside. But they are a lot more finicky than newer outdoor wood boilers. So the whole point here is changing the polluting image of outdoor wood boilers from the older boilers on the left, which are just a nightmare in terms of the image of burning wood, to what you see on the right there with an EPA Step 1 or Phase 2 boiler, which is what's legal to sell in the state of Maryland. And again, Step 2 will come in 2020, and that's the one that's going to be very difficult for the industry to meet. So run properly, these are very efficient stoves. We did some research for a few years on outdoor wood boilers, and we have a fact sheet on our website, Outdoor Wood Boilers Best Practices. And just to summarize what came out of this work is some pretty common sense things. First of all, size them for less than the maximum heat need. You develop this outdoor boiler not for the coldest day of the winter, but for something less than that, realizing on the coldest day you may need some additional heat from another source. But the reason for that is these things are only efficient if they're running pretty much at full bore. When you try and throttle them down, they become very inefficient and produce a lot of emissions. Minimize the distance from the stove to the home. Usually these have insulated underground pipes, but there is a lot of heat that's lost in those underground pipes. Measurements we did ranged anywhere from 20% or higher. So closer to the house, the less heat loss. Use only clean and dry firewood. Many systems will not run on unseasoned wood. They'll basically go out. You have to relight them. So things are changing in the outdoor wood boiler industry. I'd be interested to see what happens. Some recent developments from the non-point standards regulations from EPA. These numbers are probably a little older now. There's many more stoves that are being tested on the market. I know the number is higher than that. But companies are getting these stoves tested and certified so they can meet the new emission standards. Of course, we have companies with a lot of different stoves, and it just takes a lot of time to go through the testing to make these things meet the requirements. There is a big lobbying effort by the outdoor wood boiler industry to delay implementation of the non-point source standards, especially as they apply to outdoor wood boilers. And it's very possible that may happen. That's all being involved in the federal, in the Congress right now. It's possible there may be a 1 to 3 day delay, but I just don't think that's advisable. That's just another 1 to 3 years of more pollution taking place. So we'll see what happens with that. So you have this whole number of large, older outdoor or older wood stoves in people's homes. Like I said, pre-1988, 50 to 60% or more. And a lot of what many states have done is trying to incentivize people to change those stoves out for more efficient equipment. And there's 35 state change-out programs, average incentive of $900 to replace an old wood stove for a new one. In Maryland, we started a wood grant program such that over 5,000 stoves, 89% of them pellet stoves, that have been approved for wood grants of $700 for a pellet stove and $500 for a wood stove. And if you go to our website, you'll find more details on that. It's been a few $1 million, a very popular program. And the idea here is to encourage people to transition from fossil fuels or to change out from an older wood stove. And the way this works basically is you go to a wood stove retailer, you buy the stove, you get it you put it in, but you can do it yourself, install it yourself, but it has to be inspected, and you have a permitted inspection. And once you get that can be done by the company, whatever, by the county, typically, insurance company. You send that certificate, a permit certificate, an inspection certificate, along with the receipt to the state of Maryland Energy Administration, and they'll send you back a check. It works very slick right now in the state of Maryland. There are cheap stoves. There's very expensive stoves. You get more bells and whistles with the bigger stoves, but like this Englander stove, which is sold at many Home Depot stores and others, probably is a very efficient stove, 1.4 grams per hour. And interestingly, half of the wood stoves in the United States, pellet and wood stoves, are bought in many of these big box stores for around $1,500. But you want a decent stove, some of the bells and whistles and things like that, you're probably talking around $2,500 to $3,000. And it just depends I always encourage people to go to a wood stove retailer where they have all these appliances. They do installation and service. That high school kid at Home Depot is not necessarily going to know or have the information you need. So look up your most closest wood stove retailer and have a visit. Automated wood stoves, like I said, are out there. They're starting to be developed. There is a company called MF Fire that sells a very efficient stove, 90% efficiency, very low emissions. It's a little more expensive than some of the traditional wood stoves. And this was the winner of a wood stove decathlon held in 2013 to find more efficient stoves. And you can go to their website, MF Fire, and check those out. But basically, you take seasoned wood, you put it in, you close the door, and the wood stove takes care of the rest. And when it needs more wood, it'll let you know. So pretty cool technology, I would say. Options to reduce wood smoke includes, of course, reducing the number of wood stoves, especially those that are uncertified. Pellets tend to be lower emissions than wood. But the most important thing, I think, is ensuring that fuel you use is seasoned, especially when this comes to firewood. 60% of users cut their own wood. It takes 6 to 12 months to season wood to a 20% moisture, which is what you're looking for. And I always encourage people to buy one of these wood moisture meters on the right-hand side. You can buy them online. You can buy them in some of the wood stove retailer, Lowe's and other places, and Home Depot sell moisture meters. And the way you do that is that you know, to find out the moisture of the wood, you don't just do the outside. You split a piece of wood and you take the moisture inside, should be around 20%. And you're going to find that many times wood you get delivered from firewood dealers, if you buy wood, or you know, it's not seasoned. And many times, you know, homeowners don't buy early enough, and stoves don't run well on unseasoned wood or partially seasoned wood. And again, the bigger issue is that many retailers or firewood providers claim wood is seasoned and it's not. So make sure you check it. I would definitely get one of these meters. Seasoned wood, again, hardwood requires 6 to 9 months after split. Up in more northern, colder areas, a year and a half. The problem is that even though sometimes wet wood will burn, you get much fewer BTUs out of it. You know, if you put enough air by it, it'll burn, but you get much higher emissions and very few BTUs, because most of the BTUs that come out of that burning are used to evaporate the wood, moisture in the wood. So it's just, you know, the dynamics of how wood burns. So you always want to get more wood surface exposed to air to make it dry faster. So wood really does not start to dry until it's split. You know, leaving it in rounds is not going to do you much. And the way to season wood is to put it into a shed, but don't enclose it. Just put a cloth or a plastic or metal or something on top to stop rain from going through the pile, but you want to leave it open on the sides so the air will circulate and dry out the wood. It tends to work the best. We did some moisture firewood seasoning studies here at University of Maryland a little bit ago, and over the course of a year, we dried 4 different species of wood you see there: black cherry, hickory, black locust, hackberry, and we tested them with one of the wood moisture meters every once in a while, every month or so. And you can see that after over the course of about 9 months, from April of 2016 to February of 2017, some of the wood, the locust and the black cherry was under 20%, but your hackberry, which many people don't have, and hickory, definitely took much longer. And you see the moisture go up. That's just because of some of the changes in the way we did it. Anyway, if you have oak is going to probably be similar to hickory. So it's going to take at least a year, probably typically, to dry oak to a really good seasoning of 20%. How much is a cord? Many people don't know, but a cord is 128 cubic feet, and if you're buying wood, that's 4 foot wide, 4 foot high, 8 foot long. Some people will sell a face cord, which is half of that. But make sure you're getting a full cord. That's not randomly thrown in. That's basically stacked, 128 cubic feet, 4 by 4 by 8. So the other question interesting here is many people say, well, if you buy wood, how much does wood weigh? Well, it weighs a lot. So red oak, even dry, is about 3,500 pounds. That's some of the best wood you can get. Green weight, almost 5,000 pounds. You can see some of the other numbers here for other species. The point here is that how is a person delivering the wood? And ask them, what kind of truck are you delivering it on? If they're delivering it on a half-ton truck, or even a 3/4-ton truck, that's only about 1,000 to 1,500 pounds, maybe 2,000 pounds. So are you going to really get a cord of wood? So just think about that a little bit if you're buying wood from a vendor. How are they going to deliver it? That might tell you a little something. How much does a truck hold? This is the only study I actually found about this was from the 70s, early 80s, was that down in Georgia, they took a Dodge long bed, which is kind of, similar to a regular sized truck these days, and then a Ford short bed, which was basically like a small foreign car right now, or a short bed car, and then you have like a Datsun pickup, which is basically a small imported truck that you would find now. And as you look at how they stacked it to the top of the box or stacked above the top of the box, for even the larger sized truck, you are lucky to get much more than a half a cord of wood when it's stacked above the top of the box. So some trucks are bigger, some smaller, but the point is that most pickup trucks are going to hold about 1/5 to 1/2 of a cord of wood. So, if you're buying wood by the truckload, how big is the truck? How high is it stacked? Is it randomly stacked, or is it stacked, just thrown in, or is it stacked? So these are some of the questions you want to ask. And you can look at this, PowerPoint later in the recording, but it's some interesting information. So delivery principles: if you are buying wood and sourcing wood, check the wood before it's unloaded. Use a moisture meter. Is it a full cord? Don't let them, unload the wood until you check into those things, or basically you want to negotiate what you're paying or what everything, because once it's dumped, it's pretty much yours. There are some state requirements for sale that you're supposed to sell by the cord and all this, but frankly, many of those things are really not adhered to. The point is, if you find an honest cord of decently seasoned wood with a good service provider, tell others, because in my experience, they can be hard to find. Many firewood providers now are actually going to kiln drying wood because the transport across state lines and stuff, because of insects and disease and things like that. So you see a lot more of that in Europe, but there are many places now that are actually kiln drying wood. And of course, you're going to get seasoned wood that way. You may pay a higher price, but that is an option as well. So ask that question: is the wood air dried or is it kiln dried? Cutting your own wood. Wood is not free. Just because you have wood on your property, it takes wood time to move it, and just keep that in mind as you look to save money by burning wood. You got to buy a chainsaw and maybe a splitter and a log mover or something like that, and truck. So this is one here is a couple rules for chopping your own wood. Never park wood downhill of a tree you're cutting. When in doubt, park twice as far from the tree as the tree is tall, just to be sure, as this person did not do here. And just because you live within driving distance of a forest does not make you a lumberjack. And of course, number 4 is the most important rule: always use your neighbor's truck. So this meant to be a little comical, but it is amazing how many times people go out and cut firewood. They're not that experienced with a chainsaw, and they can injure themselves. Always wear your personal protection equipment, chaps on your legs, a helmet. Can't emphasize that enough as a person who has had some injuries from cutting with a chainsaw. So always expect the unexpected. There is the opening for firewood associations. There aren't that many out there, really. You find there's a lot of industry associations for things like arborists and landscapers, and there's regulatory requirements and all this kind of thing. There's just not much in the firewood industry. Things are being pursued in this case, but again, in some cases in buying firewood, it's going to be buyer beware, to make sure you ask the right questions and find an honest, a good provider of firewood. So in the University Extension, we've had some National Firewood Workshop here in 2016, where I am in Western Maryland, and there is an opportunity to work with the firewood industry, and we're pursuing some of those things. The Alliance for Green Heat is an organization committed to advancing, the clean, renewable energy for residential heating, and for transparency, I'm on the board of that organization, but they have sponsored a number of really important industry-type things. Wood stove design challenges, which was the last one was just completed on the National Mall, and they had a number of contestants competing for automated stoves, as well as producing thermoelectric wood stoves that generate electricity. And some really interesting results from that competition. And I would encourage you to go to the Alliance for Green Heat website. You can just Google it. You can subscribe to their newsletter. Great information about residential burning of wood and pellets and things like that. So conclusions. First, there's a real need to remove polluting wood stoves by encouraging that through buyout or incentive programs. And of course, the question I ask is, pointing the finger at everyone here who's maybe listening, is that, how about your wood stove? Have you checked it? Is it EPA? Is it a certified wood stove? Is it one of those older, pre-1988 wood stoves? You're spouting a lot of pollution, a lot of high emissions out into the air. And are you using your wood stove properly? Learn how to use it properly. Of course, improving seasoning of wood by all. Buy a meter. Make sure the wood you're using is properly seasoned and stored. And of course, then I talked about improving the professionalism of the firewood industry and how it works with consumers. I think it's a little bit of buyer aware at this point. And pellet stoves are becoming quite popular because standardized fuel. They can be installed in most any home without an expensive chimney. And also, as we look at best practices for outdoor boilers, those with outdoor wood boilers, look at the options that are out there for upgrading what you have or better using what you have now. And of course, we do a lot of partnering with the users and the industry. We have a number of non-residential wood energy fact sheets. We have YouTube videos from that National Firewood Workshop, a number of webinars and things like that related to wood energy. And again, I of course encourage you to look up the Alliance for Green Heat as well, because I think they do some really, really good work that's pushed the industry and regulators on this whole issue of improving emissions. So with that, I think the way this works now is that I basically stop sharing my screen somehow, and then go back to see if there's any questions. And I want to thank everybody for listening and be happy to answer some questions through the chat. And you have my contact information there as well. Feel free to give me a call, and we can questions. But I encourage you to look at perhaps buying an upgraded wood stove. The technology, especially with the pellet stoves, are amazing. They're thermostatically controlled. They come on and off, light themselves, put themselves out. The old days of putting jelly in there and all that stuff is way gone. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Okay, I see a couple of, can you hear me still?
Yes.
Okay. It says, would you recommend waiting until 2020 to buy a new PA certified wood stove? So no, I would not. No, because the wood stoves that are out there are quite efficient. What you should do is go to the EPA website and look at the efficiencies of the stoves that are there. There are many stoves that now meet the 2020 requirements. For wood stoves, that's a smaller lot, I would say. But still, I mean, these things are very efficient compared to that. And I knew that you're talking about a while from now, and I wouldn't have any problem buying many stoves that are out there now. How about wood bricks I'm seeing on the market? Are they efficient? Can they be used in automated pellet stoves? No, pellet stoves use pellets. They look like little pieces of rabbit food or something like that. Wood bricks would be more for using in a traditional wood stove as a more efficient source. Of course, very, very seasoned. People use them. I don't have much experience with them. I don't know how expensive that would be, so I don't know much about it beyond that. But I think firewood would probably be, well-seasoned firewood would be better. I wanted to convert, okay, here it is. I have a wood stove. If I wanted to convert to a pellet stove, can I use the same chimney or do I? No. Yeah, you can, yeah. Okay, so you can use a regular chimney for a pellet stove because really what the temperatures that come out of a pellet stove are maybe at the most a couple hundred degrees, if that. So yeah, most any chimney is going to be able to handle that. So yeah, that's definitely an option. And for those of you that have inserts, many people say, well, I have a fireplace, I'm going to put in a wood stove insert. In many cases, fireplaces are in the middle of the room. Instead of a wood stove insert, I really encourage people to look at a pellet stove insert because, you bring in a bag of pellets, you don't have as much ash, and of course they have the advantages of being thermostatically controlled and things like that. So if you have an insert question, I would encourage you to look at a pellet stove inserts as well as an option. So do we have any more questions? That was the last question I see. If anybody has another question, they could put it in there. Otherwise, I think we may be done.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. So once again, if you have any questions, you can drop us a line, and either Jonathan or me, and you can see my contact information down there at the bottom, 891@umd.edu. And that's the easiest way to get a hold of us. And as I said, we do have these webinars that we've recorded that we will post on our website. We'll get this one up as well. And we'll send everyone who's registered for the webinar a link to this. And if you just decided to join us today, thank you. Hope you have a good rest of the day and enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.